Stephen Adderwale's fingers froze on the steering wheel. The car was still moving, slow, like even the engine was afraid to make noise. His fiancée Grace sat beside him in the passenger seat, smiling at her phone, scrolling through pictures of shoes from the mall. Outside the tinted window, the evening in Lagos looked normal. Bright streetlights, a line of cars, vendors by the roadside, and people rushing home. Then Stephen saw her, and the world inside his chest broke. A woman was walking ahead on the sidewalk, moving fast like she was trying to escape the night. Her hair was tied back, her shoulders were stiff, her steps were careful, like she was protecting something. But it wasn't just her. 2 little boys walked beside her, twin boys, about 3 years old. She held one in her left hand. She held the other in her right hand. They were not playing. They were not laughing. They were walking like they already knew life was serious. Stephen's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because the woman was Mara. His Mara, the woman who had left him 3 years ago after one painful misunderstanding. The woman who had disappeared from the city like smoke. The woman he had searched for until his friends told him, "Forget her, she's gone." Stephen's heart hit his ribs hard. He slowed the car even more, his foot shaking on the brake. Grace finally looked up. "Stephen," she asked, "why are you slowing down like this?" But Stephen did not answer. He could not answer. His eyes were locked on Mara and the twins. The twins. 2 small faces, round cheeks, sharp eyes, faces that looked familiar. Stephen swallowed hard. A cold fear crawled up his spine. No, it can't be. He shook his head once, like he could shake the sight away. But it stayed. Mara's head turned slightly, like she felt someone staring, and their eyes met. For 1 second, time stopped. Mara's eyes widened too, not with joy, not with surprise only, with fear. She tightened her hold on the boy's hands, like she was scared someone would snatch them away. Then she turned quickly and started walking faster. Stephen's breath snapped. "Stop!" he shouted without thinking. Grace flinched. "Stephen, what is it?" Stephen parked the car roughly by the roadside, not even caring if another driver honked. He pushed the door open and stepped out. The warm Lagos air hit his face, but he felt cold. He crossed the road quickly, not caring about the stairs. Mara was already trying to turn into a smaller street. Stephen's voice came out louder. "Mara!" She stopped. The twins stopped too. One twin looked up at Mara with a small, worried face. "Mummy?" the boy whispered. Stephen's stomach twisted. Mummy. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself forward until he was close enough to see her properly. Mara looked different. Not the happy, playful woman he used to know. She looked tired. Older, not because she was old, but because life had been heavy. Her eyes were still beautiful, but there was pain inside them. Her clothes were simple, a plain blouse, a long skirt, and flat slippers. No expensive bag, no shiny jewelry, just Mara, holding 2 little boys. Stephen tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Mara, it's you." Mara's face stayed hard, like a wall. "Yes," she said quietly. Stephen's eyes dropped to the boys. The twins stared back at him. One twin had a small mark near his eyebrow. The other had a tiny dimple when he frowned. Stephen's heart pounded louder. He pointed slightly, his hand shaking. Who are they?" Mara's lips pressed tight. She didn't answer. Stephen stepped closer. "Mara, please, talk to me." Mara pulled the twins slightly behind her legs. Like Stephen was danger. That hurt him more than anything. "Mara," he said again, softer now, "I searched for you. I looked everywhere." Mara's eyes flashed. "And you didn't look hard enough," she snapped. Stephen blinked, shocked. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, and the first thing she gave him was anger. But Stephen didn't fight back. He deserved something. Maybe. He took in a shaky breath. "I made mistakes," he said. "I know, but I never stopped caring. I never—" Mara cut him off. "Stephen, please," she said quickly, her eyes darting around like she was scared of people hearing them. "Not here." Stephen looked around. People were already slowing down to watch. A woman selling oranges was staring. 2 schoolboys were whispering. A taxi driver leaned out of his window, curious. Mara hated attention. Stephen remembered that. so he lowered his voice. Okay, not here. Then where? Mara, just give me 5 minutes. Mara's throat moved like she swallowed something painful. She looked down at the twins. Then she looked back at Stephen with a cold face. Move, she said, and she started walking again. Stephen hurried beside her. The twins walked between them, each holding Mara's hands tight. Stephen's eyes couldn't stop watching them. Their small fingers, their small shoes, their tiny shoulders rising and falling as they walked. He wanted to reach out, but he was afraid Mara would slap his hand away, afraid the kids would scream, afraid this was a dream and he would wake up. Grace's voice suddenly cut through the air behind him. Stephen. Stephen froze. He turned. Grace had come out of the car. She walked toward them in her neat dress, her hair shining, her face confused. Stephen, what is going on? Grace asked. Then her eyes landed on Mara and the twins. Grace's face changed slowly, not anger first, not jealousy first. Confusion, then suspicion, then fear. Who is this? Grace asked, pointing slightly. Stephen's mouth went dry. Mara kept walking, pretending Grace didn't exist. But Grace stepped closer. Stephen, she said again, now louder, answer me. Stephen looked at Mara. Mara's jaw was tight, her eyes were forward, but tears were hiding behind them. Stephen felt trapped between his past and his future, between the woman beside him and the woman he once loved, between the life he was building and the life walking away in front of him. He spoke carefully. Grace, this is Mara. Grace blinked. Mara? Stephen nodded. My ex, he added quietly. Grace's eyes widened as if someone poured cold water on her head. Your ex, she repeated. Then she looked at the twins again. Her gaze dropped to their faces like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then she looked back at Stephen, her voice shaking. Stephen, whose children are those? Stephen's heart jumped. People around were still watching. Cars were slowing down. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath. Stephen swallowed. I don't know, he lied. But his eyes betrayed him, because deep inside he already had a terrible feeling. Grace stepped closer, her voice sharper. Are you sure you don't know? She demanded. Because those children... She stopped, staring harder. Then she said the words that made Stephen's blood run cold. Stephen, they look like you. Stephen's knees almost gave way. Mara stopped walking. Slowly she turned around. Her eyes met Stephen's again, and this time she didn't look scared. She looked like someone who was tired of running. Stephen's lips trembled. Mara, he whispered, tell me the truth. Mara's throat moved. Her fingers tightened around the twins' hands. The twins looked from Mara to Stephen, confused by the adult tension. One twin spoke softly. Mummy, who is that man? Mara's eyes flickered. Then she looked at Stephen and said, in a low voice full of warning, don't say anything here. Stephen stepped closer. Mara, please, just tell me. Are they mine? Mara's eyes shone like tears were about to fall, but she forced them back. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, and in that silence, Stephen felt the truth hit him like a truck. Grace gasped. She stepped back as if someone pushed her. No, Grace whispered. No, Stephen, tell me this is not what I think it is. Stephen couldn't speak, because Mara finally opened her mouth, and her voice came out like a broken glass whisper. Stephen, we need to talk, alone. Stephen nodded quickly. Yes, please. Mara looked at the street again, the eyes watching. Then she pointed toward a small corner shop ahead, where there was a bench outside. 5 minutes, she said, that's all. Stephen followed like a man under a spell. Grace followed too, angry, hurt, refusing to be left behind. They reached the bench. Mara sat with the twins, pulling them close to her sides. Stephen stood in front of them. His rich suit looked out of place beside Mara's simple clothes. His expensive wristwatch looked like it didn't belong in this moment. He didn't care. He only cared about the truth. Stephen's voice came out low. Mara, why did you leave? Why didn't you tell me? Why? Mara lifted her hand sharply. Stop, she said. Stephen stopped. Mara took a deep breath. Her eyes stared into the air like she was watching memories. Then she spoke slowly. I left because, that day, you didn't just misunderstand me. Stephen's eyebrows pulled together. What do you mean? Mara's eyes turned to him, sharp and painful. You accused me, she said. You insulted me. You treated me like I was nothing. Stephen's heart squeezed. He remembered the misunderstanding, the phone call, the woman's voice Stephen heard from Mara's phone. Stephen had thought she was cheating, but she wasn't. Mara had tried to explain, but Stephen was angry. He shouted. He said words he couldn't take back. And Mara walked away with tears. Stephen's voice was smaller now. I was wrong, he whispered. I know. Mara's eyes dropped to the twins. And after I left, she continued, her voice trembling slightly, I found out something. Stephen's chest tightened. He already knew what she was about to say. But he needed to hear it. Mara looked up at him again. Her lips shook. Then she said the words that made Stephen feel like the ground opened under him. I was pregnant, Stephen. Stephen's eyes widened. His breath disappeared. Grace's mouth fell open. The street sounds became far away. Stephen stared like he couldn't understand. Mara continued, each word heavy. I didn't plan it. I didn't trap you. I didn't even know yet when we fought. Stephen's voice was barely there. And the twins. Mara nodded once, slowly. Yes, she whispered. They are yours. Stephen staggered back one step. His hand flew to his head like it was too much. Grace made a choking sound beside him. No, Grace whispered again. Stephen's eyes turned back to the twins, two boys, his boys. His throat burned. He wanted to kneel down and hug them. He wanted to cry. He wanted to shout. He wanted to rewind time, but Mara's next words stopped his heart from moving forward. I didn't tell you because I was scared. Stephen looked up sharply. Scared of what? Mara's eyes filled again. Scared that you would take them, she said, or reject them, or treat them the way your father treated you. Stephen froze. His face went pale, because Mara had touched the one wound Stephen never liked to talk about. Stephen grew up in a broken home. His father left. His mother suffered. Stephen promised himself one thing when he became rich. My children will never be abandoned. My children will never feel what I felt. Stephen's voice shook. Mara, I would never abandon my children. Mara's eyes were tired. But how would I know? She asked softly. The last time I needed you, you shouted at me and made me feel small. Stephen's eyes burned. He couldn't argue, because she was right. Grace suddenly exploded. So you had his children and hid them, Grace snapped. And now you are bringing them out because you saw his car. Mara turned to Grace, her eyes cold. I didn't bring them out, Mara said. We were walking home. Your man stopped us. Grace flinched at the words, your man. Stephen raised his hand quickly. Grace, please, he begged. Not now. Grace stared at him. Her eyes were watery now. Not now, she repeated. Stephen, you picked me from the mall. You told me we will go and see my parents next week. You were smiling. And now you have twins standing here calling another woman Mummy. Stephen's chest hurt. He turned back to Mara again, voice desperate. Mara, where have you been all this time? Mara hesitated. Then she spoke. Not Lagos, she said. I left the city. I stayed with someone far away. I struggled. I worked small jobs. I tried to survive. Stephen looked at her hands. They looked rougher than before. He looked at her face. The tiredness was real. Something in him cracked. He couldn't take it. He bent down slowly, bringing himself to the twins' level. The twins stared at him with wide eyes. Stephen forced a gentle smile. Hello, he said softly. What are your names? Mara's voice came quietly. Kane, she said, touching one boy's head, and Kelechi. Stephen repeated the names in his mind like prayer. Kene, Kelechi. He reached out slowly, careful. The twins didn't move away. One twin, Kane, frowned and asked in a small voice, Are you our daddy? Stephen's heart stopped. Grace sucked in a sharp breath. Mara's eyes widened as if she didn't expect the boy to ask that directly. Stephen's mouth opened, but before he could answer, a loud phone ringtone blasted from Grace's bag. Grace pulled out her phone quickly. Her face changed. "Hello," she said, trying to sound normal. Then her eyes widened. "What? Are you serious?" She looked at Stephen, shaken. "Stephen," she said, voice trembling, "my driver just called me. He said someone is tampering with your car at the roadside." Stephen's head snapped toward the parked car. His blood turned cold, because the car was not far. And from the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow moving close to it. A hand, a quick movement. Then the person ran. Stephen's heart jumped into his throat. He straightened up fast. "Mara, take the boys," he shouted. Mara grabbed the twins instantly. Grace stood frozen. Stephen ran toward the car like his life depended on it. Because suddenly it didn't feel like a normal reunion anymore. It felt like someone had been watching, waiting, planning. Stephen reached the car and looked down near the tire, and his eyes widened in horror, because something sharp and metallic was stuck there, like it was meant to burst the tire the moment he drove off. Stephen's hands shook. His mind screamed one thought. This was not an accident. He turned sharply, scanning the street. The person who ran was gone, and as Stephen's eyes searched the crowd, he saw something even worse. Across the road, near a kiosk, a woman stood watching them with a stiff smile. A woman Stephen recognized. Grace's friend. The same woman who had been oddly close to Grace since they got engaged. Stephen's stomach dropped, because the woman lifted her phone slowly, recorded Mara and the twins, then slipped into a black car and drove away. Stephen whispered, voice shaking, "Who is that?" Grace looked, then her face turned pale. "Stephen," she breathed. That's my cousin." Stephen's eyes hardened. Mara clutched the twins tighter, and Stephen suddenly realized this reunion was not just about the past, it was about danger, and someone had already made the first move. Stephen rushed back to Mara and the twins, heart pounding. But before he could speak, Mara's phone buzzed. She checked the message, and her face went completely white. She showed Stephen the screen with shaking hands and whispered, "Stephen, they found us." Stephen's blood ran cold. "Who found you?" he asked. Mara's lips trembled, and just as she was about to answer, a black SUV pulled up hard beside them, doors unlocking with a loud click, like someone was about to grab the twins right there on the street. The black SUV rolled closer like it owned the road. Its headlights flashed once, then the engine stayed on, low and angry, like a warning. Mara stood up fast, pulling the twins behind her like a shield. Keen started to cry. Kelechi held his brother's shirt, eyes wide. Stephen stepped in front of them, without thinking. His body moved before his brain did. Grace's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Stephen's mind raced. Who is inside that SUV? Why are they here now? The back door of the SUV opened slowly. Not fully, just enough to show a shadow inside. A deep voice called out, calm like ice. "Mara." Mara's whole body stiffened. Stephen turned his head slightly, whispering, "You know them?" Mara didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the SUV, like she was staring at a snake. The voice spoke again. "Don't run," the voice said. "You can't run forever." Stephen clenched his fists. He took one step forward. "Who are you?" Stephen demanded. The door opened wider. A man stepped out. He was tall and dark-skinned, wearing a black cap and dark sunglasses, even though it was evening. His face looked hard, like someone who smiled only when someone else was crying. Two other men stepped out behind him, also in dark clothes. People around started to move away. Even the orange seller quietly pushed her tray back. The street suddenly felt empty, like everyone knew trouble was coming. The man in sunglasses looked Stephen up and down. Then he laughed once. "So," he said slowly, "this is him." Stephen's heart thumped. "What do you mean, this is him?" The man ignored Stephen and looked at Mara again. "Mara," he said, "you have something that doesn't belong to you." Mara's voice came out tight. "My children don't belong to you." The man's smile grew. "Your children?" he repeated like it was funny. "You mean his children?" He pointed at Stephen. Stephen's stomach dropped. So this man knew. Stephen turned sharply to Mara. "Mara, who is he?" Mara's fingers trembled around the twins' hands. She said one word, like it hurt her mouth. Victor. Stephen frowned. Victor who? Mara swallowed. Victor Nwoke, she whispered. Stephen didn't know the name, but the way Mara said it, like a wound, made Stephen's chest tighten. Grace stepped forward suddenly, trying to sound strong. Victor, she called out, what are you doing here? Victor turned his head toward Grace, then his smile became even sharper. Ah, he said, so you're here too. Grace froze. Stephen's eyes snapped to Grace. You know him? Grace's voice shook. He's my cousin, Grace said quickly. I told you. Stephen remembered. Grace had said her cousin was helping her with wedding things. She talked about her cousin often, but Stephen never met him. Now Stephen looked at Victor again. Victor walked closer, slow and confident. Mara, Victor said, I'm not here to talk too much. Just hand over the boys. Stephen's anger exploded. Are you mad? Stephen barked. Those are not your children. Victor's smile didn't leave. He tilted his head. Not mine, he agreed, but they are useful. Stephen's blood turned cold. Useful? That word was not normal. That word meant something bad. Mara's eyes filled with fear. She pulled the twins closer. Stephen, she whispered urgently, please, don't argue with him here. He's dangerous. Stephen held his ground. I don't care, Stephen said. Nobody will touch them. Victor laughed again. You're brave, he said. Or stupid. I'm not sure yet. Then Victor lifted his hand slightly. One of the men behind him moved, reaching inside the SUV. Stephen's eyes widened. He didn't want to imagine a weapon. He didn't want the twins to see anything terrible. Stephen raised his palms. Okay, Stephen said quickly. Everybody calm down. Victor's hand stayed up. Stephen's voice became controlled. Victor, what do you want? Stephen asked. Victor's lips curled. I want Mara to pay for wasting my time, he said. Stephen blinked. Mara's face tightened. Grace suddenly spoke, panicked. Victor, please, don't do this here. Stephen turned to Grace again. Grace, he said, slow and dangerous, why are you begging him like you know what he wants? Grace's eyes darted away. Victor smiled at Stephen's question, like he enjoyed the confusion. Mara, Victor said, tell him why you ran. Mara's breathing became fast. The twins began to whimper. Kelechi whispered, Mummy, I'm scared. Mara kissed his forehead quickly. Then she looked at Stephen, her eyes wet. I didn't just leave because of our misunderstanding, Mara said softly. Stephen felt his heart squeeze. What do you mean? He asked. Mara's voice broke. I left because Victor found out I was pregnant. Stephen's face went still. Victor nodded like he was proud. And I offered to help her, Victor said, spreading his hands like a saint. I offered money, protection. Mara's eyes flashed with pain. You didn't offer help, she snapped. You offered a cage. Victor chuckled. Stephen's hands tightened into fists again. Explain, Stephen said to Mara, voice shaking. Mara, explain everything. Mara stared at the ground for a second. Then she forced herself to speak because she could see Stephen needed it. When I left Lagos, Mara said, I went to a smaller city. I stayed with a friend. I was scared. I had no money. I was carrying twins. I was alone. Stephen's chest hurt. Mara continued. Then Victor showed up. He said Grace told him where I was. Grace flinched. Stephen's head snapped to Grace like lightning. Grace told him, Stephen asked, stunned. Grace's lips trembled. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered. I just wanted to know where you went. Victor cut in smoothly. She told me because she wanted answers, Victor said. She wanted to know if you were really gone, or if you were still coming back. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Stephen felt sick. Mara continued, voice thick. Victor said he could help me start a new life. But the way he looked at me, the way he talked, it wasn't kindness. Victor's smile became thin. Mara swallowed. He wanted me, Mara said, not love. Ownership. Stephen's jaw clenched hard. Mara's eyes moved to the twins. When I refused, she whispered, he threatened me. Keen cried softly. Mara stroked his head. Victor shrugged like it was nothing. I only wanted to protect my investment, he said. Stephen stepped closer to Victor, fury rising. Investment, Stephen repeated. You are talking about human beings. Victor looked Stephen dead in the eye. I run businesses, Victor said. Everything has value, even people. Stephen's hands shook. He wanted to hit Victor, but Mara's hand touched Stephen's arm gently. Stephen, please, Mara whispered. He wants you to lose control. Stephen forced himself to breathe. Victor clapped slowly, mocking. Oh, Victor said. Look at this. Family bonding. Grace burst out suddenly. Victor, stop it, she cried. This is not what we planned. Stephen froze. Silence slammed down. Even the street seemed to stop breathing. Stephen turned slowly to Grace. What did you just say? Stephen asked, his voice low. Grace's face went pale. I didn't. Victor laughed loudly now. Oops, Victor said. She said it. Stephen's eyes didn't leave Grace. Grace, Stephen said slowly, what plan? Grace shook her head fast, tears dropping. No, Stephen, please, listen, it's not. Victor leaned closer like a man enjoying a movie. Stephen, Victor said, your fiancée is not as innocent as she looks. Grace screamed, Victor, shut up. But it was too late. Stephen's heart pounded like a drum. He stared at Grace, waiting. Grace's shoulders shook. Then she whispered, almost like a confession falling out of her, I was scared you would leave me. Stephen's mouth went dry. Grace cried harder. I loved you, she said. And when you kept searching for Mara, I felt like I was just a replacement. Stephen blinked. So you, what? He asked, voice cracking. You helped him find her. Grace shook her head. I didn't know he would do all this, Grace cried. I only told him because he said he could talk to her and make her stay away, so you could move on. Mara's eyes flashed with anger. You knew I was pregnant, Mara snapped at Grace. Grace froze. Mara's voice rose. You knew, Mara repeated, and you still sent him to me. Grace's lips trembled. She couldn't answer. Stephen felt dizzy, because the truth was ugly. The woman he planned to marry had helped the danger find Mara. Victor smiled wide, like this was the best day of his life. And then, Victor said, I waited. 3 years. I watched. I listened. Stephen's eyes narrowed. You watched? Stephen asked. Victor nodded. I knew you would meet her again, he said. A man like you always meets his past again. Stephen swallowed, fear rising. Victor continued. And when you marry Grace, Victor said calmly, I plan to collect what I deserve. Stephen's blood ran cold. What do you deserve? Stephen asked. Victor pointed at the twins. The boys, he said simply, or money big enough to make me forget them. Mara screamed, never. The twins clung to Mara, crying now. Grace sobbed loudly. Stephen felt like the whole world was shaking, but he forced himself to stand tall. No, Stephen said firmly. You will get nothing. Victor's smile slowly disappeared. His face became hard. Then he nodded once, like he expected that. Okay, Victor said quietly. Then we do it the hard way. He snapped his fingers. One of his men moved fast. Everything happened at once. The man stepped forward and grabbed Kelechi by the arm. Kelechi screamed. Mummy! Mara lunged forward, trying to pull him back. Stephen moved instantly, like a lion. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted hard. The man shouted. Kelechi slipped free and ran into Mara's arms, but before Stephen could breathe, the second man grabbed Cain. Cain screamed even louder. Stephen's eyes went wild. No! Stephen roared. He punched the man's shoulder hard. The man staggered but didn't let go. Victor stepped back, watching like a cold king. Grace screamed, Stop! Please stop! Mara cried, Stephen! Stephen fought like his life depended on it. Because it did. Cain's small face was wet with tears. His little feet kicked in the air. Stephen grabbed Cain's hand. The man pulled the other way. For one terrible second, it felt like Cain's arm could break. Stephen's heart nearly stopped. Then Stephen did the only thing he could. He shoved his own body forward and slammed into the man with all his strength. They fell. Cain slipped free. Mara grabbed Cain quickly, pulling him to her chest. Stephen scrambled up, breathing hard. People were screaming now. A passerby shouted, Call police! Someone else shouted, Thief! Victor's face tightened. He didn't like that the street was waking up. He pulled out his phone quickly, talking fast into it. Then he looked at Stephen with a calm, deadly stare. "This is not over," Victor said. "You will beg me." Stephen's chest rose and fell. "You won't touch them," Stephen hissed. Victor smiled again, small, cruel. Then he pointed subtly behind Stephen. Stephen turned, and his stomach dropped, because another black SUV was pulling up from the other side, and another. 3 SUVs now, blocking the road, blocking escape. The street went quiet again, quiet in the worst way. Mara clutched the twins so tight they were pressed into her body. Grace stood shaking, face wet with tears. Stephen's mind raced. Too many cars, too many men. Victor was prepared. This was planned. Victor spoke softly, like a teacher explaining a lesson. "You see, Stephen," he said, "you are rich, but you are not the only one with power." Stephen's hands shook. He looked around for help. But people had already backed away. Some were recording with their phones. Nobody wanted to jump into trouble with dangerous men. Mara whispered through tears, "Stephen, please. They will kill you." Stephen's eyes burned. He leaned closer to Mara, voice urgent. "When I say run," he whispered, "run with the boys. Don't stop." Mara shook her head quickly. "I can't run with 2 children," she whispered back. "They are too small." Stephen's eyes flicked to Grace. Grace was shaking badly. Stephen's voice became sharp. "Grace," he said, "do you have your phone?" Grace nodded, crying. "Call the police," Stephen ordered. "Now." Grace fumbled, hands shaking. Victor laughed. "Police?" Victor repeated. "In Lagos traffic?" "They'll come when the story is finished." Grace dialed anyway, crying as she spoke into her phone. Stephen faced Victor again. "What do you want?" Stephen demanded. "Say it." Victor stepped closer, voice low. "You will come with me," Victor said, "and we will talk like men." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "And if I don't?" Victor's face didn't change. "Then I take one of the boys," Victor said simply, "and you will spend the rest of your life searching, the way you searched for Mara." Mara let out a broken sob. Stephen's heart felt like it was being crushed. Victor continued, calm and cruel. "You have 1 minute to decide." Stephen's mind screamed. He couldn't let them take a child. He couldn't. But if he went with Victor, it could be a trap, a kidnapping, a disappearance. Stephen looked at Mara. Mara's eyes begged him, "Don't go." Stephen looked at the twins. Their faces were wet. They were shaking. They needed him. Stephen made a choice in his head. He stepped forward slowly. "Okay," Stephen said. Mara gasped. "No," she cried. Grace cried, "Stephen, don't." Victor smiled, satisfied. Stephen raised his hand slightly to calm Mara. "It's okay," Stephen said, eyes locked on Victor. "I'll come, but you don't touch them." Victor nodded. "Good." Stephen stepped closer. Victor's men moved in, ready. But Stephen leaned in, like he was agreeing. Then suddenly Stephen grabbed Victor's wrist hard and twisted, yanking him forward. Victor stumbled, shocked. Stephen pulled Victor close, using him like a shield. Everything happened so fast, people screamed. Stephen shouted, voice like thunder, "Move back!" Victor's men froze, confused. Mara stared wide-eyed. Grace screamed. Stephen's heart pounded like a drum. He whispered into Victor's ear, low and dangerous, "If any of your men touch those boys, I swear you will not leave this street standing." Victor's breath hitched. Then Victor smiled, because he wasn't scared. He was enjoying it. Victor whispered back, calm like a devil, "You're making mistakes, Billionaire." Stephen didn't answer. He shouted at Mara again, "Mara, run!" Mara's body jolted. She grabbed the twins and started moving fast, half running, half dragging them, trying to disappear into the nearest crowd and side street. Kana stumbled. Kelechi cried, but Mara didn't stop. Stephen held Victor tighter. Victor's men started to move again. Stephen's eyes scanned for a way out. Then, a loud bang. Sound exploded in the air, not like a car backfiring, not like a door slamming. A sharp, frightening sound that made everyone scream and duck. Stephen's blood turned to ice because he didn't know who fired it. He only knew one thing. This had turned into a life-and-death fight. Stephen looked toward Mara and saw Mara freeze in the middle of the street, holding the twins. Her eyes were wide, her mouth opened in silent horror. because a man from one of the SUVs had stepped out with something in his hand, something dark and dangerous, aimed in their direction. Mara screamed, "Stephen!" And the twins screamed too. Stephen's heart dropped into his stomach, because the next second would decide everything. Stephen tightened his grip on Victor and shouted, "Don't you dare!" But the armed man didn't stop. He raised the weapon higher. Mara clutched the twins and tried to turn. And Stephen realized with terror that Mara and the boys were trapped with nowhere to run. Then Victor smiled in Stephen's ear and whispered, "Pick one, Stephen. Your life, or theirs." Stephen's heart slammed against his ribs like it wanted to break free. "Don't," he shouted again, his voice tearing through the street. The man holding the weapon hesitated for just 1 second. That 1 second felt like a whole lifetime. Mara stood frozen, holding the twins so tight their small bodies were pressed into her chest. Keen's face was buried in her blouse. Kelechi's eyes were wide, filled with fear he was too young to understand. "Mummy," Kelechi whispered, "I'm scared." Mara's lips shook. "I know, my baby," she whispered back. "Hold me tight." Stephen's arms were locked around Victor's neck from behind, his grip strong, desperate. Victor's body was stiff, but his face was calm, too calm. Victor smiled. "You won't do it," Victor said softly, almost kindly. "You're not that kind of man." Stephen's teeth clenched. "You don't know me," Stephen growled. Victor chuckled. "Oh, I know you very well," Victor replied. "You are careful. You think too much. You don't like mess." Stephen's breathing was heavy. The street was silent except for crying, car engines, and phones recording. Grace stood a few steps away, shaking so badly she could barely stand. Her phone was still pressed to her ear. "Hello, hello," she cried into it. Please send someone. They are trying to take children." No one answered. Either the call dropped or help was still far away. The armed man shifted his weight, looking at Victor for instructions. Victor spoke calmly, not raising his voice. "Lower him," Victor said to Stephen like he was giving advice. "Before someone gets hurt." Stephen looked at Mara. Her eyes met his. They were full of fear, but also trust. She believed he would save them. That trust burned Stephen's chest. Stephen spoke slowly, loudly, so everyone could hear. "Victor," he said, "if anything happens to those children, you will not survive today." Victor laughed softly. "You see," Victor said, "threats, that's all rich men know how to do." Stephen's muscles screamed with tension. He needed a way out. Then sirens. Faint at first, but real. Someone shouted, "Police!" Grace gasped loudly. "I hear it, Stephen, I hear it." Victor's smile faded just a little. The armed man glanced toward the sound. Stephen felt hope rise for half a second, but Victor raised his hand slightly. The armed man steadied again. Victor leaned his head back slightly, close to Stephen's ear. "You think police scare me," Victor whispered. "They work for whoever pays better." Stephen's stomach dropped. Victor continued, voice low and deadly. "You came into this late, Stephen. I have been planning this for years." Stephen tightened his grip. "Planning what?" Stephen asked through gritted teeth. Victor smiled wider. "Your fall," he said. Stephen's eyes burned. Before Stephen could think again, Victor suddenly stomped hard on Stephen's foot. Stephen hissed in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. Victor twisted sharply and slipped free. Stephen lunged again, but Victor was already moving backward. "Now!" Victor shouted. Everything exploded at once. The armed man rushed forward. Another man grabbed Stephen's arm from behind. Stephen fought wildly, swinging his elbow, breaking free. People screamed. Someone dropped a bag. A car horn blared. Mara screamed Stephen's name again. Stephen turned just in time to see the armed man grab Kenny. Keen screamed loudly, "Mummy!" Mara tried to pull him back, but another man blocked her. Stephen felt something snap inside him. "No!" he roared. He ran. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just ran. The armed man pulled Keen toward the SUV. Keen kicked and screamed, his small hands reaching out. Stephen jumped forward and slammed into the man with everything he had. They crashed to the ground. The weapon skidded across the road. Stephen grabbed Keane and pulled him close. Keane cried loudly, shaking. "I've got you," Stephen whispered desperately. "I've got you." But then a heavy hand grabbed Stephen's collar from behind. Victor. Victor pulled Stephen up hard and punched him in the stomach. Stephen gasped in pain, dropping to one knee. Keane stumbled back toward Mara. Mara grabbed him instantly, crying. Victor stood over Stephen, breathing hard now. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Victor snapped. Stephen wiped blood from his lip and looked up. "I will die before I let you touch them," Stephen said. Victor's eyes darkened. "Then you might die," Victor replied. He lifted his hand again. Another man picked up the weapon. This time he aimed not at the twins, at Stephen. Mara screamed. "No!" Grace screamed too. "Stop, please!" The world slowed. Stephen stared down the dark barrel. His heart beat loud in his ears. "So this is how it ends," he thought. Then, "Drop it." A loud voice cut through the air, clear, commanding. Everyone froze. Even Victor turned. 2 police vans screeched into the street from opposite ends, blocking the SUVs. Uniformed officers jumped out, weapons raised. "Drop your weapons now," the officer shouted again. The armed man froze, confused. Victor's face tightened. The officer pointed directly at him. "You," the officer barked. "Hands where I can see them." Victor slowly raised his hands, smiling like he wasn't worried. Stephen collapsed to the ground, breathing hard. Mara rushed to him, holding the twins tightly with one arm. "Stephen," she cried, "are you okay?" Stephen nodded weakly. "I'm okay," he said. "The boys?" "They're fine," Mara sobbed. "They're fine." Grace sank to the ground too, crying uncontrollably. The police moved in quickly, surrounding Victor and his men. One officer picked up the weapon carefully. Another officer cuffed the man who had grabbed Keane. Victor didn't fight. He allowed the handcuffs like he was bored. The officer shoved Victor forward. "You're under arrest," the officer said. Victor laughed. "For what?" Victor asked. "Standing on a public road?" The officer ignored him. Stephen slowly stood up, pain shooting through his body. He walked toward Victor. Their eyes locked. Victor leaned closer, even with handcuffs on. "This is not the end," Victor whispered. "You can't protect them forever." Stephen's voice was low and steady. "I don't need forever," Stephen said. "I just need today." Victor smiled thinly. "We'll see," he said. Victor was pushed into the police van. The SUVs were searched. People started murmuring loudly now. Phones were everywhere. The street felt noisy again, but different. Like something big had happened. Stephen turned back to Mara and the twins. Ken and Kelechi were still crying softly. Stephen knelt in front of them slowly, carefully. His eyes were gentle now. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Stephen said softly. "I'm so sorry." Keane sniffed. "Are you the bad man?" Keane asked, scared. Stephen's heart broke. "No," Stephen said quickly. "I'm not bad, I promise." Kelechi stared at Stephen closely. "You saved us," Kelechi said quietly. Stephen swallowed hard. "Yes," Stephen replied. "I will always try." Mara watched Stephen with tears streaming down her face. For the first time since they met again, she saw the man she once loved. The man who would fight. The man who would not run. A police officer walked over. "Sir," the officer said to Stephen, respectful, "we need your statement. All of you." Stephen nodded. "Yes, of course." Grace stood slowly, wiping her face. She looked broken. "Stephen," she whispered. Stephen turned to her. His eyes were not angry, they were tired. "We will talk later," Stephen said quietly. Grace nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Stephen didn't answer, because his eyes were already back on Mara and the twins. The police escorted them away from the street to a quieter area nearby. As they walked, Mara whispered to Stephen. "He will come back," she said. "Victor never lets go." Stephen looked ahead. "So will I," he said. They sat in the police van, giving their statements. Mara explained everything, Victor's threats, the years of fear, the messages she received. Stephen explained the confrontation. Grace explained her part, crying as she spoke. The officers listened carefully. One officer shook his head. "This man has been on our watch list," he said. "He's dangerous." Stephen clenched his jaw. "Then don't let him out," Stephen said firmly. The officer sighed. We will try. Try. Stephen hated that word. After a while, they were allowed to leave. Stephen insisted on taking Mara and the twins with him. No arguments, he said. Mara hesitated. I don't want trouble for you, she said. Stephen looked at her seriously. You are not trouble, he said. You are my family. That word, family, made Mara's chest tighten. They drove in silence. The twins fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted. Mara watched them, her hand resting gently on their heads. Stephen drove slowly, carefully. Grace sat quietly, staring out the window, silent tears falling. The car pulled into Stephen's estate. Tall gates opened, security guards stood alert. Mara's eyes widened slightly. She had never been here before. Stephen parked and turned off the engine. No one moved. The air was heavy. Finally, Stephen spoke. Mara, he said softly, you and the boys will stay here. It's safer. Mara shook her head slowly. I don't want to take advantage of you, she said. Stephen looked at her. This is not advantage, he said. This is responsibility. Grace suddenly spoke, voice small. And me? Stephen turned to her. Grace's eyes were red. I can't pretend anymore, Stephen said honestly. Not after today. Grace nodded slowly. I understand, she whispered. Stephen stepped out of the car and opened the back door. He gently lifted Kelechi, careful not to wake him. Mara lifted Kane. They walked into the house together. The house felt different now, not empty, not cold, but full. As they laid the twins down on the couch, Stephen watched them sleep. His sons. His heart felt full and afraid at the same time, because deep down Stephen knew something. Victor was arrested, but Victor was not defeated, and this fight had only just begun. Later that night, as everyone slept, Stephen stood alone on his balcony, staring into the dark city. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Stephen frowned and answered. A familiar voice laughed softly on the other end. You think bars can hold me, Stephen? Victor said calmly. Sleep well tonight, because tomorrow I come for what's mine. The call ended. Stephen's hand tightened around the phone. And behind him, inside the house, one of the twins suddenly woke up crying, like he sensed danger was already closer than anyone knew. Stephen did not sleep that night, not even for 1 minute. He stood on the balcony long after Victor's call ended, the phone still tight in his hand, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the sleeping city below. Lagos never truly slept, but tonight it felt like the city was holding its breath with him. Inside the house, the twins finally stopped crying. The soft sound of their breathing drifted through the open doors. Mara sat beside them on the couch, watching them like a guard who refused to blink. Grace stayed in the guest room, silent, ashamed and very aware that her life had changed forever. Stephen closed his eyes. Victor's voice echoed again in his head. Tomorrow, I come for what's mine. Stephen opened his eyes slowly. No, he said out loud, his voice calm and deadly. Tomorrow I end you. This was no longer just about fear. This was about war. By 5 a.m., Stephen was already dressed. Not in a suit, not in luxury clothes. He wore a simple black shirt, dark trousers, and a watch worth more than most houses in Lagos. His face was calm. Too calm. He walked into his private office inside the mansion and pressed one button on his desk. Within minutes, his phone rang. Good morning, sir, a voice said. This is Aide, your security chief. Wake everyone, Stephen said. I want the full team here in 1 hour. Yes, sir. Stephen ended the call and made another, then another and another. Each call went to someone powerful, a top lawyer, a retired police commissioner, a media executive, a government contact, a bank chairman. Stephen Adderwale was not just a billionaire because he had money. He was a billionaire because people listened when he spoke. Mara woke up to the sound of quiet footsteps. She sat up quickly, panic flashing through her, but it was Stephen standing near the window, looking out. You didn't sleep, she said softly. Stephen turned. No, he replied. I couldn't. Mara stood and walked closer. You don't have to do this, she said. Victor is dangerous. Stephen looked at her carefully. Mara, he said gently, I grew up afraid of losing people, afraid of becoming like my father. Mara listened, silent. But today, Stephen continued, I am afraid of only one thing. He looked toward the twins, failing them. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Stephen continued, his voice stronger now. Victor thinks power is fear, Stephen said, but power is preparation. Mara searched his face. You sound different. Stephen gave a small smile. I am, he said, because now I have something to protect. By 8 a.m., Stephen was seated at the long glass table in his private boardroom. Around him sat 10 men and women, all serious, all powerful. Screens lit up the walls, showing photos, documents, names. Victor Nwoke's name was written in bold. Stephen stood up slowly. Victor Nwoke tried to kidnap my children last night, Stephen said calmly. The room stiffened. One man gasped quietly. Stephen continued, he threatened their lives, he threatened their mother, and he thinks my money is just numbers. Stephen placed both hands on the table. I want everything, he said. Silence. Then his lawyer spoke carefully. Sir, everything. Stephen nodded. His businesses, his accounts, his protection, his image. The retired commissioner leaned forward. Victor has connections, he warned. He pays people. Stephen's eyes were cold. So do I. A woman at the table typed quickly. We can freeze 3 offshore accounts immediately, she said, if we move fast. Stephen nodded. Do it. Another man spoke. He owns warehouses in Apapa, he said, mostly illegal goods. Stephen turned. I want every warehouse searched, Stephen said, by tonight. The media executive smiled slightly. Sir, he said, the press would love a story like this. Stephen looked at him. No, Stephen said, not yet. First we strip him naked. The room nodded. This was not anger, this was strategy. Victor woke up in a small, ugly cell. He smiled to himself. He had been arrested before. He always walked free. He leaned back, relaxed. Then the cell door opened. A police officer stood there, not smiling. Victor Nwoke, the officer said, you have visitors. Victor smirked. Already, he said. I must be important. But when he walked into the interview room, he frowned. No smiling friends, no bribe-taking officers, just Stephen's lawyer, and 2 serious-looking men. Victor sat down slowly. What is this? Victor asked. The lawyer slid a file across the table. Victor opened it. His smile disappeared. Inside were documents, frozen accounts, seized properties, cancelled licenses. Victor's voice dropped. This is a joke. The lawyer shook his head. No, Mr. Nwoke, he said. This is Stephen Adewale. Victor's jaw tightened. The lawyer continued calmly. Your accounts are frozen. Your businesses are under investigation. Your protection has been withdrawn. Victor laughed suddenly. You think money scares me? The lawyer leaned forward. No, he said, but truth should. Victor's eyes narrowed. What truth? The lawyer tapped the file. Kidnapping, human trafficking, illegal arms, threats against minors. Victor's face darkened. This is war, Victor growled. The lawyer nodded. Yes, he said, and you started it. Back at the mansion, Stephen knelt beside the twins as they ate breakfast. Ken laughed as cereal spilled on the table. Kelechi tried to copy Stephen's serious face and failed. Stephen smiled for the first time that day. You like cereal? Stephen asked. Kelechi nodded. Yes, Daddy. Stephen froze. The word hit him like lightning. Mara gasped softly. Stephen swallowed hard. Say that again, Stephen said gently. Kelechi smiled shyly. Daddy. Stephen's eyes burned. He looked away quickly. Mara reached out and touched his arm. They chose you, she whispered. Stephen nodded slowly. I choose them too, he said. By afternoon, Victor was furious. He paced the cell like a trapped animal. Then his phone buzzed. A message. Accounts frozen. Boss angry. We can't move anything. Victor slammed the phone. He made another call. No answer. Another. Disconnected. Victor's face twisted with rage. Stephen was moving faster than he expected. Then Victor smiled slowly. Fine, he muttered. If I can't reach him, I'll hurt him. That night, black vehicles approached Stephen's estate. Quiet, careful. But Stephen was watching. From the security room. 20 screens lit up the walls. "Sir," Aide said calmly, "we have movement." Stephen nodded. "Let them in." Aide blinked. "Sir?" Stephen's eyes were sharp. "I said let them in." The gates opened slightly, the vehicles rolled in, and then lights blazed, sirens wailed, armed security surrounded the intruders in seconds. On the ground, voices shouted. The men froze, they dropped their weapons. Stephen watched calmly. "Call the police," Stephen said, "and the press." Aide nodded. "Yes, sir." Stephen turned away. Victor had played his hand. And lost. Later that night, Stephen stood in his office again. His phone rang. Unknown number. Stephen answered. Victor's voice came through, shaking with anger. "You think you won?" Victor spat. Stephen's voice was calm. "I don't think," he said. "I know." Victor hissed. "You ruined me." Stephen replied quietly. "No, Victor. You ruined yourself the moment you touched my family." Victor went silent. Stephen continued. "This is your last warning," Stephen said. "Disappear from our lives, or I make sure you spend the rest of your days behind bars." Victor laughed bitterly. "This isn't over." Stephen ended the call. As Stephen turned to leave the office, his assistant rushed in, pale. "Sir," she said urgently, "there's a problem." Stephen stopped. "What kind of problem?" She swallowed. "The police just called," she said. "Victor was transferred this evening." Stephen frowned. "Transferred where?" She looked at him, fear in her eyes. "He escaped during transport." Stephen's eyes darkened. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. And Stephen realized something terrifying. Victor was now loose, with nothing left to lose. And Chapter 5 would decide everything. The rain started slowly, not heavy, not loud, just small drops tapping against the windows of Stephen's mansion like fingers knocking on glass. Stephen stood still in his office, his phone still in his hand. Victor had escaped. For a few seconds, the room felt too quiet. Then Stephen moved. Calm, focused, dangerous. He pressed a button on his desk. "Aide," he said, his voice steady. "Lock the estate. Full alert. Nobody in. Nobody out." "Yes, sir," Aide replied immediately. Stephen ended the call and walked out of the office, down the long hallway, toward the living room, toward his family. Mara felt it before she heard anything, that deep fear that sat in her chest for years. The kind that never fully leaves. She was sitting on the floor with the twins, building blocks. Kenny laughed when the tower fell. Kelechi clapped his hands, but Mara's smile faded. Her heart started racing. Stephen walked in and saw it immediately. "Mara," he said softly, "we need to talk." Her hands shook slightly. "Victor escaped," Stephen said gently, "but listen to me carefully." Mara pulled the twins closer. "He will come," she whispered. "He always does." Stephen knelt in front of her. "Mara," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "he will not touch you again. Not you. Not them." Mara searched his face. This time she didn't see fear. She saw control. "You promise?" she asked quietly. Stephen nodded. "I swear," he said. Kelechi looked up. "Daddy," he asked innocently, "why is Mummy sad?" Stephen swallowed hard. He smiled gently. "She's not sad," Stephen said. "She's just tired. And Daddy is here." Kelechi nodded, satisfied. Mara wiped her eyes. Grace stood in the doorway, listening. She had packed her bags already, not because Stephen told her to, but because she knew. This story was no longer hers. She stepped forward slowly. "Stephen," she said. Stephen turned. "Yes?" Grace took a deep breath. "I'm leaving tonight," she said. "I don't want to cause more pain." Stephen nodded. "That's best," he said honestly. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong," she said. "I let fear turn me into someone I don't like." Stephen didn't argue. He didn't blame. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly. Grace looked at the twins one last time, then at Mara. "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. Mara hesitated, then nodded. "Goodbye, Grace," she replied. Grace turned and walked away. That chapter closed. Victor was angry, hungry, desperate. He had lost everything: money, protection, power. Now he wanted one thing: revenge. He sat in a small apartment far from the city center, pacing. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Victor frowned and answered. Victor woke, a calm voice said, "This is a chance." Victor froze. "Who is this?" "Someone who can help you disappear," the voice said. "One last deal." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Where?" The voice gave an address. Victor smiled slowly. He didn't know it yet. But he was walking into Stephen's hands. The warehouse by the river looked empty, dark, silent. Victor stepped inside cautiously, then lights turned on, bright, blinding. Victor stopped. Stephen stood at the far end. Not alone. Police officers, security, lawyers, cameras. Victor laughed bitterly. "So this is it," Victor said. "You couldn't fight me like a man." Stephen walked forward slowly. "I am fighting you like a father," Stephen said. Victor scoffed. "You think this scares me?" Stephen raised his hand. A screen behind him turned on. Victor's smile faded. Photos, videos, recordings, messages, proof of everything. Illegal deals, threats, plans to kidnap children. Victor's face went pale. Stephen spoke calmly. "You made one mistake," Stephen said. "You thought power was noise." Victor clenched his fists. "And you made one mistake too," Victor snapped, "letting me escape." Stephen shook his head. "No," he said. "I let you think you escaped." Police stepped forward. Handcuffs clicked shut. Victor struggled. "This isn't fair," Victor shouted. Stephen looked at him one last time. "Neither is kidnapping children," Stephen said. Victor was dragged away. This time there was no smile, no escape. Only silence. Days passed, then weeks. Victor was charged, locked away. No more calls, no more shadows. Mara started sleeping again. The twins laughed more. The house felt warm, alive. Stephen watched the twins run through the garden, chasing each other. "Daddy," Keane shouted. "Watch this," Stephen laughed. "I'm watching." Mara stood beside him, smiling softly. "You're good at this," she said. Stephen looked at her. "At what?" "Being a father," Mara said. Stephen nodded slowly. "I waited my whole life for this," he replied. The wedding was small, simple, no cameras, no media, just people who mattered. Mara wore a soft white dress, not expensive, but beautiful. Stephen wore a clean suit. The twins wore matching outfits and held flowers, laughing too much to stand still. When Mara walked down the aisle, Stephen's eyes filled with tears. When she reached him, she whispered, "We made it." Stephen squeezed her hands. "Yes," he said, "we did." The twins clapped when they kissed. Everyone laughed. Years passed. Stephen kept his promise. The twins never felt abandoned, never felt afraid. They grew up knowing their father stood when it mattered. One evening, as the sun set, Stephen sat with the twins on the balcony. Kelechi asked, "Daddy, will you ever leave us?" Stephen pulled them close. "Never," he said. "I'm here forever." Mara watched from inside, her heart full. The pain of the past had not disappeared. But it no longer ruled them. Stephen stood at the same road years later, the same place where he first saw Mara walking away with the twins. Only this time, they walked together, hand in hand. A family. Stephen looked down at Mara and smiled. "You almost got away," he teased. Mara laughed. "But you caught us," she said. Stephen nodded. "Yes," he replied softly, "and I never let go again." Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for amazing stories.